Good evening and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is February 8th, 2017, and amazing news events are tumbling down toward us in an avalanche of information. And we have to look at the sources, and that includes all the sources of information. Let us not forget that there is not only corporate-sponsored media out there, but there is also a thriving and growing alternative media. The numbers of citizen journalists are growing exponentially around the world. There are literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of citizen journalists who have a platform. They have fans. They have people who watch them in the tens of thousands, in the hundreds of thousands, in the millions, and they are only going to grow stronger. At the very same time, the corporate-controlled media are doubling down on their message. They are squelching and suppressing dissent among their own ranks because they are running scared. They are diminishing. They are losing money. Now, in some areas, they're doing a little bit better. Certain news outlets. I saw a article about the New York Times, and you have to take it with a grain of salt. The New York Times has been caught in, at the very least, a lie of omission, and sometimes outright lies, so many times. And their bias is so amazingly narrow that we have to be careful when we look at the New York Times. I think you should be careful when you look at any news source and be skeptical, but nevertheless look at all of them. Look at both sides of an issue and use your critical thinking skills to decide where the truth is. And we're not talking about absolute truth. We're talking about truth beyond a reasonable doubt, the legal definition of what is true. And how do we arrive at truth beyond a reasonable doubt? And that, again, you use your critical thinking skills, you look at the evidence, you weigh the evidence, you look for corroborative evidence, and then you have to come to your own decision. But the amazing thing is that while the New York Times has had to diminish itself, and it was even talking about going to the tabloid format in the hard copy form, apparently, probably in part because of Trump's various rants and criticisms of the New York Times. Certain people who probably already supported the bias of the New York Times have subscribed digitally to it. So their digital subscription rate has gone up, which is good for them. Otherwise, though, they've had to consolidate, they've had to diminish themselves, and so this is amazing. This is an amazing situation we're in right now. The New York Times is known as the Gray Lady. That's its nickname. It is very old. It is well over 100 years old. And it has been known for a very long time as the paper of record, the newspaper of record. So it would be like the official newspaper of the United States. And whether or not it still is, that's another question. The Washington Post has also been a kind of paper of record for the Beltway, inside of the Beltway. But again, the Washington Post has also narrowed its focus to such an extent that it has to be called extreme levels of bias. National Public Radio has also narrowed its focus to the point where its bias is so very constricted that it becomes obvious to people who are looking at both sides of the issue that part of the issue, half of the side of the argument, all arguments have two sides, half that argument is being completely omitted and not being dealt with fairly by the news outlet. And why is that happening? It's happening for a number of reasons. One of them is simply that the ownership of, for instance, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they feel that their interests are threatened by some forces that are at play in the United States and in the world at large. Their status quo, their position in power, in control, is threatened. And so they're using their power, their media outlet that they basically own, as a weapon to try to convince people who may be questioning the reality that's being presented to them, they're trying to convince them that this reality is real. It is not either partly or wholly fabricated. And that's a difficult issue. I mean, that's a hard ocean to row across. That's a hard row to hoe, and I don't think they're going to be able to make it. It's like trying to put the genie back in the bottle. That's the old metaphor. It's Pandora's box. Once you open Pandora's box, you can't put everything, all the truths, all the different perspectives back in that box. It is actually physically impossible. Or if you want to use the metaphor of people waking up or people going to sleep, once people are awakened, it is very difficult to get them to go back to sleep. Or once a person has been taken out of their trance, you snap their fingers and they come out of their trance and they're suddenly looking at it like, wow, wow, where was I? What was I thinking? I thought the world was this way, but now I'm seeing that the world is a different way than I thought. Another metaphor would be the Matrix metaphor. Once you take that red pill, you have a choice. Take the blue pill, go back to sleep. Wake up, believe that everything that you've experienced and that choice was a dream. There was no red pill or blue pill. That was a dream. Or you take the red pill and go and see the reality. The dream vanishes. The sugar coating tastes bitter. The beautiful veneer burns off or shrivels up and blows away. And the reality, which may not be so pleasant, is revealed. And even though it may not be so pleasant, it is nevertheless reality. And some people will tell you there is no reality. Reality is what you make it. We create our own reality. And I understand that. Yes, you could say there is no solid object. Solid objects only appear to be solid. They're actually just collections of electrons, neutrons, and that's an illusion that wall, that stone wall, is hard and actually exists. But nevertheless, if you bang your head against that stone wall, it will hurt. You can bang your head against that stone wall 100 times or 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times, And every single time, it's going to hurt. Your head will not, one of those million times, just sort of go right through that wall, and just sort of merge with that wall. Oh, that wall doesn't really exist. 99 times out of 1,000 times it existed, but one time it didn't exist. No, every time your head will hurt when you hit your head against that stone wall. And so effectively, we can say that that wall is real and that wall exists. Now there's a lot of walls out there that don't exist, that are created. They only look like walls. If you actually test the strength of that wall, your hand really will go through it. And there's technology out there to create something that looks very real. We see it in films all the time. The ability of Hollywood to create a background using a green screen like the background behind me. It's an illusion. And they're getting incredibly sophisticated about that. In fact, they're getting to the point where people actually can be created in a computer, and they look like real people. They don't look like cartoons of people or two-dimensional or phony or fake. They begin to reach the point where they fool the eye. Like in that new Rogue One movie where they recreated young Carrie Fisher in the last scene of the movie, and we saw her face and it looked like her. Now some people can still tell the difference, that they can say, oh, that doesn't look like her. Other people are fooled. But the technology is getting better and better so that we will very soon be able to recreate people who are maybe dead and bring them back and make them look absolutely real. So someday, who knows, maybe they'll be able to, let's say, take John Wayne, and have a new movie starring John Wayne, even though he's been dead since the 70s, or whatever they want. And this can be used for entertainment purposes, but it also can be used for fooling people. Now, you won't be able to fool everybody, because some people will either be able to tell the difference, or there'll be telltale signs where you could take that videotape or that film, it'll be videotape, or digital. It's not tape anymore, it's all digitalized. We're just calling it videotape. And you can analyze it. You can say, well, this is clearly fake. And more, we're going to have to deal with that because a reality is being created for us. It's a matrix-like reality, and more it's coming into play. But on the other hand, the information that it's fake is getting out there to people, and many people are realizing that there is a possibility what they're seeing could not be real, what they're reading could not be real, what they're hearing could not be real. They now have the technology that can imitate voices as well as faces, and we have airplanes that can fly without a pilot, and it can be fitted into an ordinary jetliner, and that jetliner can be going across the sky and nobody's up there because it's all remotely controlled. A computer is essentially driving or flying that airplane. And so we're using those more and more. And so we have to be aware of what is reality. That's essential in life. We don't want to be fooled, because we can be taken advantage of if we're fooled. We can be exploited. We can be manipulated. We can be enslaved. We can be poisoned. We could be, any number of things. We can be tricked in any number of ways if we cannot tell the difference between reality and fiction. So this is extremely important in the modern world. And this is why these citizen journalists have popped up. They've they're becoming more and more prevalent and more influential. And even though the power structure says, oh, don't look at these people, don't, that's fake. We're the real ones. But yet you have to analyze it. You have to look at both and find out who is really on target. And the ones who are on target, they're getting flack. They're getting attacked. And someone who's being attacked a lot right now in the media is Alex Jones. And they're saying Alex Jones is a phony, he's fake. Believe me, if he wasn't on target, he wouldn't being attacked. He would not be being attacked. People have saying, well, he lies. He says things about people. Well, people are always, they can always sue Alex Jones. And people have tried to sue Alex Jones. They can say, well, this isn't true what he said about me. This is a deliberate lie. Then, okay, sue him. They have. And he has a very, very good record of being sued and then presenting the evidence. And so basically, they have no leg to stand on. And this happens over and over and over. I mean, amazing things are happening. Amazing things. Like right now, a very complicated and long-term FBI investigation against enormous pedophile rings, several pedophile rings that are probably all interconnected in the United States, is being overturned. And the rock is finally being lifted up, and the cockroaches that are underneath are being captured right now as we speak. And we're going to see a lot more of this in the next few days. Just a couple of days ago, 474 pedophiles were arrested in California. 28 children were released from captivity, being sex trafficked. They were discovered probably chained up in some basement or dungeon somewhere, and they were released. The next, and this is in California, and the coasts have it the worst. They're all over, these pedophiles are all over the place, but they're really concentrated on both coasts. And the Washington, D.C. area is coming up. And as soon as Sessions, this is what I've read, is sworn in and takes over, then they're going to spring the trap, and many, many people will be arrested. There'll be a sweep because the FBI have infiltrated these pedophile rings, and they're just waiting for Sessions to get in, and the arrests are going to start. And it does involve the so-called Pizzagate and several other establishments in the area of Washington, D.C., and very, very high-level people. Dozens of people will be arrested. Hillary Clinton is involved in this pedophilia, and I don't know if she's a pedophile herself, but the thing about it is that wealthy men very often like prostitutes, and prostitutes are used as to sweeten a deal, and it's sort of a courtesy. You have a guy in town that you want to convince that we can work together. Well, you're going to want to put him in a very good mood, and so for a lot of people, the way you put that guy in a really good mood so you can do business is to send him a free prostitute. And unfortunately, some people prefer underage prostitutes and children. And so they send these sex-trafficked children to these very powerful men, and then they have their way with them. And believe me, this is called sexual slavery. And these kids, I would not think would be willing to do this if they weren't being coerced in some manner. And so you have a situation in which, so this technically makes this person a pedophile. You like underage prostitutes? Boom, you're a pedophile. That's the label. There's severe penalties. It's illegal. Some people may not know this, but it is. It's very illegal. And so people like Anthony Weiner, who is very closely associated, married to Hillary Clinton's closest advisor, is involved. And we know that he's a pedophile. He's been already caught sending photos, and he has child porn and all this. There's a lot more. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton's husband, has been found over and over and over, close friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He's a billionaire who's been convicted of pedophilia, soliciting a minor for sex. He was convicted. He's a felon, but he also has an airplane called the Lolita Express. You can look it up. He owns an island in which a lot of these underage kids they're there on this island, and they're available for the guests to use for their pleasure. And Bill Clinton has been to that island like 20 times. And Hillary Clinton has been like 8. And so she knows. And Hillary Clinton also knows, and Bill Clinton and all these people who are involved in this know that that's how you get like the Saudi prince or something on your side, is you give him that prostitute, whether it would be a boy or a girl. And this will sweeten the pot and make them more amenable to doing the deal. And these are very, very powerful people, the most powerful people on the planet. Now, the latest information that I have is that Bill Clinton is cooperating with the FBI, and that he is basically throwing Hillary Clinton under the bus, and that she has already attempted to flee the country, get on an airplane and go to Bahrain, which has no extradition treaty with the United States, for refuge against what she knows is coming. And that is the crackdown, the indictment, and the sweep of the people involved in the pedophile rings. And we know that she's involved. We've seen it already. The close associate of hers, who is a woman, right after the Haiti earthquake, who was stopped at the border with Dominican Republic with about a dozen children, which she said were orphans, and she was planning to start an orphanage. But when they talked to these children, they said that they were stolen, that they did have parents, they were not orphans, and they were returned to their parents. They were stolen children, not orphans. And the thing about it is that, kids are valuable to the elites of the world because you use them as a kind of a currency. You trade them around among themselves. And you might say, well, how did so many pedophiles get in these high-level positions? The reason is because a pedophile has an exploitable vice, an exploitable weakness. And so you want to elevate a pedophile to a high-level position because that means you can control him because of his weakness. And you can get him on tape, you can film it, and that's what they do. And if he becomes your boy. You have him in your pocket in the best possible way, a way that he would never ever be able to get out of. As long as you have that video that you can show of him having sex with an underage prostitute, you've got something to dangle over his head in case he tries to get off the reservation. If he tries to do the right thing, if he tries to not follow your orders, then you can just eliminate him by just giving that video to the press or to the right people in the press, the upstanding people. Not everybody in the press is corrupt, or the government, and the government would, let it be known. If a man needs to be eliminated, you can do it. You don't have to necessarily execute him. You can just put him in prison. And so that's why you have so many people who do the bidding of a few corporate people. They have to. They may not even want to, but they do. They have to, because they have a horrible secret that they're afraid of getting out. I mean, this is one of the reasons why Bill Clinton got to be the president of the United States. Because they knew Bill Clinton had a terrible secret, had a vice that he could really even not control. He was a sex addict. He is a sex addict. He still is. And they thought, this is our guy. This is the perfect guy we could use. And they sort of tested him out back in the 80s with Mena, Arkansas. They came to him and said, we want to put a secret base in Arkansas, to fund the Contras, to send them drugs, weapons, to fight against the communists in Nicaragua. Would you go along with that? And he did. He was governor. And Hillary did too. And so they got a lot of money for doing this. This helped their cause. They kept it secret. Well, they may or may not have known, they probably did know, that on the return trip, the planes, instead of flying back to the United States empty, would bring in cocaine. So it was a triangle. Down with the weapons to Nicaragua, over to wherever it was that they got the drugs, like El Salvador or something, or Mexico, and then back up to Mena, and they'd unload. And people died who found this information out, at that time. But now it's pretty much out and in the open. But even though there has been no arrests, Oliver North was involved. It was part of the Iran-Contra scandal, huge scandal. And so this was the part of it that didn't get really explored, although if you went to the right place, even back in the 80s, you could find it. You could find the reality of this. Okay, that's, I guess, enough about Bill Clinton. It's important to know this information, and this is a matter of historical record. It's not something I'm just making up. It's important to know it because it does have an influence on events that are happening 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. You look at the young Bill Clinton over the Bill Clinton now, and we can see, if we look at Bill Clinton's life, that he might be capable of doing something like essentially throwing his wife to the wolves. And we'll see how this plays out. But this is supposed to be happening beginning next week, and it may happen over a period of months. But there is something to be said for draining the swamp. This is what Trump has called for. And so when people are completely down on Trump and saying there's nothing good about him, it's really unfair to do that, because you can bet if Hillary Clinton were president, none of this would be happening. We wouldn't be about to see an enormous cleansing of pedophile rings in Washington, D.C. That would definitely not, they would have, the FBI would have lost Comey, and because she blamed him, at least in part, for the loss, her loss. And she probably would have put a new FBI director in there, somebody who would have been more amenable to keeping the lid on these crimes. We have to remember that one of the main reasons, or maybe the only main reason, why all those emails that were discovered at Anthony Weiner's house that belonged to Hillary Clinton, the reason they were discovered is because of the FBI investigation into Anthony Weiner's illegal activities involving pedophilia. So it's all been part of an ongoing investigation, and the email scandal is sort of an offshoot of that original investigation. Now, Tony Podesta was also revealed to be involved. And some people poo-poo the code words that they were using, but the evidence appears to show that these were indeed, at least some of them, were obvious code words that they used, a secret code, to describe the various flavors, I should say, of child prostitutes that were available, and who was going to get them and where and when and how old they were and all this. And now, so it is coming out. And we cannot trust people like our institutions like the Washington Post to tell us the truth about this. They are involved themselves. Yes, because high-level journalists, some of them, are involved. We can't trust necessarily all the politicians to do the right thing, because some of them are involved. Law enforcement, we can't necessarily trust law enforcement to do anything about it, because some of them are involved. Some of them are not. Some of them find it despicable behavior, illegal, and it has to come out. And so this may never have happened if Trump had not taken the control in Washington, D.C. And so this could be a good thing. This is always a good thing. And don't say that it doesn't happen and that it's fake, because pedophilia has always been around, and particularly among people with a lot of power. They're the ones who tend to accumulate power. They're essentially criminals. They will do whatever it takes to gain power. And once people have power, some of those people will abuse that power. And we can look back through history and see how that has come about. All the way, you just go back, 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, Renaissance, medieval period, ancient Rome, ancient Greece. You will see it, Egypt, it's all there. It's all part of the record, the historical record, that people in power like to abuse the most vulnerable, to exploit, abuse, use the most vulnerable sections of the population. This is why the human race has been struggling ever since civilization was created, and probably before then, with this small group of criminal people who like to control people. They've been struggling with that, and people say, oh, that's the way it's always been. Yes, that's the way it's always been. And that's the way it will always be. And if people are not willing to stand up, at least from time to time, then the exploitation will continue and will increase. The level of abuse will continue at its present rate if nothing is done about it. So this is just something we as human beings are obligated to do. We don't want to do it. We don't want to have to get, heavy duty and arrest people and ruin careers. And, we can imagine that there may be even some suicides as a result of this sweep that's about to happen. Because people will realize that, there's nothing. Some people very well might realize, or they may be suicided. They have teams that go around and suicide people because, this person's about to spill the beans. I have to protect myself. Send a couple of guys over there, to inject them and drag them over to the noose and haul them up. And then kick the stool out or something like that, however they do it. Or give the people the heart attack with the high-tech weaponry that shoots the ice crystal into them of the poison, and then it melts and there's no trace. This type of thing does go on. Assassinations. At the same time, we have the mainstream media, we have the corporate media, we have what more and more is the criminal cartel controlling major news outlets, calling for the death of Donald Trump, hinting at how he could be eliminated, calling for a coup, calling for impeachment. Impeachment is almost the most minor. I saw on MSNBC someone calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump. He's been in office for 2 weeks. This has to be unprecedented. But this is the fear that he is engendering. How could anyone engender that much fear? There was a huge uproar just a few days ago over the travel ban. And a couple hundred people were delayed from arriving at the United States so they could undergo extreme vetting instead of just a normal level of vetting. Now, some people have been calling for this. And these were 7 countries that were determined by the Obama administration that they were the most likely to have a terrorist grudge against the United States. They might send their operatives over here. And so Donald took those 7 and he said, okay, let's select those people who come from those countries for extreme vetting before we allow them in. If they don't pass, we're not going to let them in. And however you think about that, it didn't last very long, only a couple of days, and it was halted by a temporary restraining order by a federal judge in, I guess, Seattle. And I didn't realize that a federal judge could stop the whole program for the entire country in one particular state. But anyway, that's what happened. And see, people talk about how Donald Trump is a dictator, but does that the way a dictator would behave? Just, okay, well, it stopped. Then I guess it stopped. There's nothing we can do about it. I think a real dictator might take more extreme measures than that and use his power to somehow, jail the judge or something. Jail him or, shut him out, override him in some way. But no, Donald Trump has decided, well, okay, then we'll just shut the program down. Now, it is in the courts, and it may go to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what the Supreme Court says, whether or not the U.S. president has the constitutional right to limit immigration to the United States or to prevent people from certain countries from getting into the United States. Right now, there is no travel ban. People are coming in. Well, You know, I personally think that that the Muslims are not as bad as some people think, in general. You have this very radical element, but most of them are not that radical. They want to come to the United States, not because they want to destroy the United States or kill people, but because they want to further their career or go to college, do something to improve their lives, their situation. Because there's so many problems where they live. And the United States is just an amazing country in which we don't have those severe corruption. There's so much corruption all over the world, even in the United States. But I have to say, I've never had to give a bribe to anyone in the United States. I couldn't, bribe a police officer. I would never consider doing that because to get out of a ticket or something like that. I would be afraid of what would happen. I mean, the police officer would probably arrest me for trying to bribe him in the United States. Now, in many, many other places of the world, that would be the expected way that you would get out of getting a traffic ticket. And that's just a kind of a very minor example. But in many countries around the world, in Central America, South America, Africa, Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia, once a leader gets control of the country, then he begins to enrich himself just unbelievable. He may come in with almost nothing, but by the time he leaves office, he's a billionaire. And where did that money come from? I mean, literally, the corruption is so bad that the leadership just loots the treasury. And this happens in some countries over and over and over and over. And the citizens are impoverished. And what can they do? They're powerless. And they become just a cash cow for leadership, essentially. And again, you can look back at the historical record and you can see this is nothing new. This is the way it's always been for thousands of years. Leadership gets in power, they enrich themselves. They take whatever they want, whether it would be money or land or people, whatever their pleasure is, they have access. They have complete control. Leaders in some places had and now still have absolute power. Anyone who they want to eliminate, they can just point their finger and that person is gone, dead, eliminated, liquidated. And so we have to watch out for this. And people are saying, oh, Trump is going to be a dictator. He is a dictator. Well, we'll find out. We'll see. We have to at least give the guy a chance. Now, it could be that in 6 months, everyone will hate Donald Trump, will despise him and want to get rid of him, and he'll be impeached, and he'll be thrown out of office in disgrace or jailed. Who knows? Or God forbid, assassinated. I don't think that the mainstream media, the corporate-controlled media, should be calling for the assassination of Donald Trump, even in editorial pages. I mean, we do have laws against that. We have laws that are very, very strict. You cannot threaten the life of the President of the United States. And I guess what the FBI does is, I guess you have to make repeated threats. Then they begin to think you're serious if you make repeated threats against the President of the United States. But the President of the United States, it is true, does always get death threats. I mean, even Alex Jones and many other prominent people get death threats, and they ignore them, and they don't consider them to be serious most of the time. Although it is true that many celebrities and politicians, they always have their Secret Service detail. They have their armored vehicles and their guarded compounds where they live. And so this is always a possibility. But at the same time, many of these very wealthy people also perpetrate these same type of crimes against their opponents. So they're doing it to each other. It's not just a member of an ordinary, it's just like not a nobody, but it's actually another very powerful, wealthy person trying to eliminate, or one group trying to eliminate the leadership of another group. So we have to take that into account. We always think of assassins as nobodies. Sirhan Sirhan, Lee Harvey Oswald, John Hinckley. He tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan. But in almost every case, and I don't remember the name of the guy who assassinated Martin Luther King, but we find that there's some other agenda going on, and it was like true. It turns out to be that Lee Harvey Oswald was right when he said, "I am just a patsy," before he himself was assassinated. And that term patsy, I remember hearing him say that way back in the 60s, and I'd never heard that term before. I found out that's what you mean, that's what you use when you're just being used by someone else. And I think Lee Harvey Oswald was used by someone else. And this has come out. Most Americans, a huge majority of Americans, believe that the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy was, at the very least, orchestrated by powerful people, that they were involved. Many people think that Oswald was not even involved at all, that he never shot John Fitzgerald Kennedy, that he was killed by someone else. There's a new movie coming out called Jackie, which I might see in the next few days, and we'll see what take that they make of this. It's about the few days after or during it starts with the assassination and goes a few days afterwards. And Jackie was supposed to have said, they said, "Well, why don't you change your dress because it had blood stains on it?" She said, "No, I'm going to wear it. I want the American people to see what they did." And that's sort of a paraphrase. But so she had an idea that there was more than one person involved. And this is just a small thing. There's a lot of evidence, and you might say, well, that evidence could have been faked. Nowadays it's amazing because in 1963, you had a couple of cameras running while JFK was being assassinated. But now, everybody has a video camera on their iPhone or their ordinary cell phone. So you get many, many different views of an event. And what the kids do now is they immediately upload that video to Facebook or Instagram or something, whatever is their media of choice that they have access to, and they could create their own little show, so to speak, and put it on the internet or YouTube right away, within a matter of minutes or seconds, if they want to. So there's really no time to fake something. I mean, to fake an event, that takes money, that takes setup, that takes lighting, that takes directing, and all kinds of technical aspects to try to use those apps to create something in videotape. And when you do create it, an expert can check on it and tell you whether or not it's genuine. And so you do get, nowadays, what you get is a lot of shows being put on that, yeah, that are fake, but some of them are real. I mean, it may not be digitally fake, but it's actors. It's fake blood, which hopefully no one will notice is not real. Crisis actors. You see in the papers ads for crisis actors. Crisis actors needed. Here's the pay. Assemble at this time. You know, you may get wet. You may have to wear makeup. And it may be uncomfortable. I've seen these ads before. And these are for drills. And they do realistic drills for terrorist attacks or catastrophes of some type or the other. And the way that these terrorist attacks amazingly happen, they coincide sometimes with a drill of the exact same event. And just by a weird coincidence, suddenly it's real world. It's not a drill. Oh my God, this is actually happening. It's real. And it turns out that the guy who was hired to play the terrorist is actually a real terrorist. And we're actually supposed to believe this? Or are we just being manipulated by the social engineers who are pulling off a terrorist attack which will further their agenda, which might be any number of different things, to push us toward a way of thinking that coincides or harmonizes with the general tenor of thinking that goes across the world, whether it be gun control or smart growth or centralized government or loss of national sovereignty, destroying national sovereignty, getting rid of borders, no more countries. And right now the buzzwords are white nationalism, racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, misogyny. These are the words, the labels. And anytime someone disagrees with you, you can just label right on their forehead, boom, one of those labels, and they might protest. White supremacist, oh, that's a big one right now. And, you know, whether or not these labels will stick for a week or 2 days or 2 months or 2 years is hard to say. But I can say this, that many, many people in America and around the world are tired of being labeled. And then once you label someone, you can just shove them off and everything they say is discredited. All their opinions are discredited because they've been labeled, and you can stick them into a little box over here and just shut it off from your consciousness and pretend that it's not real. Because, you know, like Alex Jones, like I've had people say, oh, Alex Jones, that's fake news. Well, have they actually watched it? Have they actually looked at it? I mean, he's only one example of thousands of journalists around the world, not just in America, but he just happens to be the biggest one. Now, he was ignored for a very long time. He's been on air for 20 years, and only in the last year has the mainstream media even mentioned him. And now he's in the news every day. And this is, of course, just making him more interesting to people. And what he does is he interviews people constantly. He interviews scientists, politicians, philosophers, authors of mainstream books, best-selling books, engineers, military people, airline pilots, people who are experts in their field. Economists. It just goes on and on and on. He's always interviewing people. Almost every show he interviews a reputable member of our society who has something to say. And sometimes these men and women do not get much of a platform anywhere else. And they go to Alex Jones because he will listen and he will give them a platform. And they have an opinion. And there's no reason in the world why people shouldn't be allowed to listen to, a person who's got a PhD or whatever his opinion is, and weigh it with the opposite view. And more so than just the false dichotomy that you have, in which people are prevented from really listening and being able to hear the whole story on one side. Instead, you get very focused, very limited exchanges of views on two sides, and we're supposed to make a decision from this? We're supposed to make a decision about who's right, and it's very difficult to make a decision when you're listening to the mainstream media and you have two opposing views, which they're doing more it's very kind of rarely. And sometimes you'll say, well, why did they choose that person? That person doesn't even really know that much about this subject. They're not really the go-to person. They're not really the top person in the field. Whereas that top person in their field, like climate change, they will go to Alex Jones or someone else like him. Alex Jones is only one of many journalists, citizen journalists. He started with a public access TV show with no money, and look at where he is today in 20 years. Pretty amazing. So we have to be open-minded. So that's all there is for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well.